I don't think about any of my students as much as I think about Henry Willow. For decades, I lectured in the field of biology at a respected university. My students have gone on to spearhead conservation efforts and save species from the edge of extinction. They have helped cure disease and deepen our understanding of life itself. So many of the young minds I taught over my career grew to do good. Quite a few of them reached out to me over the course of my retirement to tell me I played a pivotal role in their career. Through my tutelage, so many of my students have gone on to do great things. Good things. I have so much to be proud of, yet I don't think about any of my students as much as I think about Henry Willow. Henry had attended 2 of my classes, both in the second semesters of his first and second year of study. He had spent his first class much like many of the other freshers who would never finish off their degree. He skipped all lectures that weren't mandatory, arrived late if he did actually show up, and seldom paid any attention during class. When I saw his name on the attendance list a year later, I hoped he would have bettered his academic commitment. He didn't. Henry still had the look and, sadly, smell of a student who only came to university to drink and experiment with drugs. Even though most of Henry's ilk had dropped out by then, he still kept his grades high enough to stay enrolled. I once tried keeping Henry after class to discuss what he planned to do with his biology degree. He wholeheartedly refused and rushed out of class as fast as he could. The young man had no interest in science, and I made peace with the thoughts that he wasn't long for the university. By then, I had taught for long enough to know which students were a lost cause. I was certain that I knew the trajectory of Henry's studies. I was certain, yet I was wrong. In a way, Henry wasn't long for the university. What I underestimated was his commitments to the field of science. One week, as per usual, Henry's name was missing from the attendance sheet. This was nothing out of the ordinary, so I barely registered it. Yet, a couple days later, Henry dropped by my office to apologize. He said he had contracted food poisoning and was unable to attend the lecture, but that he would never miss another one again. He apologized profusely for missing the class and any classes before that, and swore to me that he had changed his ways. He even asked if there was any additional reading that he could do to get a deeper understanding of what was discussed during the lecture. Henry would often show up to my class hungover, and he would look it. Yet that day he was pale as a ghost. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, and even his voice seemed to emanate from the depths of weariness. The young man seems to have had a serious medical episode. I pointed Henry to a couple of studies referenced in the week's reading that explored the topics at hand in more detail, and told him I appreciate him dropping by. I also told him to drink plenty of water. Henry thanked me profusely and said that he was wholeheartedly committed to learning as much as he could from me. After he left my office that day, I considered whether his sudden change of commitment to study might be some sort of a prank. Were it not for Henry's terrible state, I would have been certain that it was. Henry's change of heart, however, appeared to be genuine. No longer did I see him drunkenly milling around the outdoor seating of the pub by the university. Instead, long after classes ended, the man would sit in the library, digging through every major piece of scientific writing that he could get his hands on. Henry's presence in my classes changed as well. No longer did he sit in the back of the lecture hall, trying to sneak a nap or chat with one of his female colleagues. Henry sat at the front of the class, pen in hand, committing every theory or thought I expressed into his notebook. He listened to every word of my lecture and nodded his head vigorously at every point that I made. He even laughed proudly at all the little jokes I would pepper in throughout my lecture. Henry looked healthier than he did the night at my office, but his color had not fully returned. He still looked like a man who had a close shave with death. His sudden change in attitude should have alerted me that something was off, yet back then I was simply happy to have such an attendant student. Perhaps in my hubris I thought that it was I who had motivated him to be committed to his studies. Yet it wasn't me that brewed a thirst for knowledge in Henry Willow's soul. I had nothing to do with it. Henry's newfound passion for the science had different roots. After the lecture, he stayed behind to speak to me. Henry lavished me with praise for my presentation, and he even remarked on the little jokes I peppered in. Then, without pause, he started to ask questions. I was happy to see a struggling student engage with the material. Perhaps his appreciation of my humor endeared me to help somewhat as well. Maybe somewhere deep down I could sense that something was off with the man, but I didn't ask myself those questions. I only answered Henry's enthusiasm. The young man was full of questions and curiosity, but he never outstayed his welcome. Henry would make his inquiries for 20 minutes after a lecture, no longer. He didn't want to eat up too much of my valuable time, he said. Once or twice, when he found an interesting study and couldn't help himself, he showed up at my office. I didn't mind the intrusion, but Henry apologized profusely nonetheless. I enjoyed his enthusiasm, and most of his questions were at least tangentially related to what was being studied in class. Yet, every once in a while, Henry would ask something strange. The first question that caught my attention was, by when will humanity be able to map the genome of a horse? The question had caught me off guard. I had to ask Henry multiple times to clarify what he meant. He patiently explained. When I gave him my general guess of 2 decades, he jotted something down in his notebook, thanked me for my time, and left. The questions never got less strange or sudden, yet they always came at the end of our talks. I considered them a friendly intellectual prodding to end our weekly conversation on. When Henry asked me whether a dog could ever be engineered to lay an egg, I even laughed. But I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have laughed, because Henry Willow was being deathly serious. As the semester drew to a close, I started to suggest to Henry other classes he should sign up for to fully utilize his time in university. Henry dutifully noted down my recommendations in his notebook, yet he never commented on them. Any talk of his 3rd year of university seems to deflate the young man. It wasn't until the lecture before final exams that he told me the truth. Henry wasn't going to be attending the 3rd year of his studies. He was planning on dropping out. To my utter shock at his decision, Henry simply lowered his eyes. When I demanded an explanation for why he would leave university, he struggled for words. Finally, when the nerves left him, he told me that I would consider him insane if he told me the truth. The young man seemed shaken, and I was genuinely concerned. I promised to Henry that I would listen to his reasoning without judgment. When I said those words, I meant them. I am a man of my word. I am a man of my word, but soon I did wonder whether Henry had lost his mind. During his brief bout of food poisoning, Henry had a series of overwhelming visions. They told him he was destined for a life in the sciences. They told him to pay close attention to his studies and utilize his professor's knowledge as much as he can. He was to absorb what he could and then drop out of university at the end of the year. His work in the field of science would be done beyond the scope of academia. He was to create new life. He was to forge the hybrids that would rule the world. It all sounded like a joke, yet Henry had that same strange look in his eyes he had when he asked about the genome of the horse. Out of sheer curiosity, I asked what Henry would do for work if he were to be a scientist without a degree. "I plan to win the lottery on Wednesday," he answered without hesitation or smile. "And much of the winnings will be invested into stocks where they will grow. My future research requires sizable amounts of capital." Even though Henry's voice was dead serious, I laughed. I desperately wanted him to be joking. In an effort to coax a smile out of him, I suggested that if he wins the lottery, he should get his favorite lecturer a nice bottle of wine. It was a mere twitch of the lips, but Henry Willow did smile. He said he would. He said he would, and then he bid me goodbye. Henry was the first among the class to hand in his exam a week later. It was flawless. Over just a couple of months, Henry had transformed from my most troubled pupil to the top performer of my class. As the other students handed in their papers, I started to take comfort in the thought that Henry's ramblings about the lottery were a mere joke. The moment the class was dismissed, however, Henry came to talk with me once more. There was a bottle of wine in his hand. A 76 Leroy, an expensive purchase even then. Henry profusely thanked me for my tutelage and presented me with his promised gift, with his promised evidence. At first, I protested that I could not accept a bottle of wine from a student whose exams I was yet to mark, but eventually, I asked the question that was my true concern. Had Henry really won the lottery? With pride in his voice, Henry said he did. Everything was going according to plan. He was soon to depart the country and continue in his pursuit of knowledge. I was not to fret, though. Eventually, I would hear of his success. Henry Willow walked out of my lecture hall that day, and I have never seen him again. The bottle of Leroy still remains with me. Initially, I planned to open it in celebration on the day I was to hear of what became of Henry Willow. When that day finally came, I could not open the bottle. I still haven't opened it. I cannot bear to drink to Henry Willow's depravity. Henry had reached out to me over email in 2008, the year I had retired. His message lacked the usual praise or pleasantries that I was used to from our talks in the lecture hall. Henry simply stated his research had yielded significant results. He would be unable to discuss them digitally, but he insisted that I could come and see them. His new laboratory was situated in Central Asia, and he would happily cover the travel expenses. I wrote back to Henry, thanking him for the offer, but that I was not in a position where I could travel to the other side of the world on a whim. I was, however, curious as to what he had been up to. I asked him to at least give me a hint, the field of science in which he practiced at least, yet my email got no response. Instead, about 3 months later, I received a package. It contained a series of tapes along with a small note. The realm of science I've committed myself to is beyond your comprehension. Within the viewing of a single tape, I knew Henry was right. The images that flashed across my TV screen defied comprehension. Henry Willow had brought creatures to life that should have never seen the light of day. I have done my best to forget the contents of the tape, yet they still haunt my nights. I saw terrible amalgamations of animals that should never exist. I saw crabs with the eyes of men and cats with 6 legs, and rats that spun spider webs and shot acid from their mouths. The viewing of but one tape left me pale. I needed to see no more. Once I managed to steady my hands, I wrote to Henry once more. I demanded he tell me how he found my address and explained what I had seen on the tapes. If it were a joke or an exercise in trickery and animation, I was not amused. Were these hybrid monstrosities a real product of flesh? I stated I would never in my life visit such a vile den of abhorrence. I urged Henry to abandon his pursuits. These beasts he had created were an affront to God. I got a response within an hour. It simply read, "You need not travel. You will soon see the hybrids yourself. The hybrids will soon rule the world." I have spent many sleepless nights in fear of what Henry's final piece of correspondence meant. I wish I had spent those nights thinking about the conservation efforts and research and cures that my other students brought into fruition, but I don't. I don't think about any of my students as much as I think about Henry Willow.
Sup ghouls, it's me, Mike, the guy who writes these stories. After months and months and months of editing work, the new United People's Institute of Science series is finalized. Over the next 20 weeks, y'all will get 20 tales of terror connected to the unspeakable horrors of the... every Thursday at 11 p.m. Central European Time. With the tourism industry being what it is, it's going to be a crazy long summer for me. I'll try to pop in at the end of every story with one of these little outros. Still experimenting with what I'd like to leave at the tail end of these episodes, but if you've listened this far, tell me what you were scared of as a child down in them comments. Who knows, maybe I'll put together a story for you when I have a spare moment. Huge thanks to Bit22 for lending his voice to the story, and to Repulsive for providing their haunting tunes as backing music. If you can't wait a full week for another episode, 2 future tales are currently available for free members on Patreon. If you want to binge through the whole series months in advance and help me fund the other projects I'm working on behind the scenes, drop by patreon.com/MikeJLanger for the full United Peoples experience. Speaking of which, an extra special thank you to the patrons that have stuck around during the recent content drought. Big old thanks to Bob Condor, Dan Kincaid, Matt, Joyce, Mr. CreepyPasta, Kus, Dying Sun, Paul Evans, Shion, and Benoit Chaminot. It's thanks to y'all that I get to pursue the cool little projects I do on the side. Hopefully, I'll be able to tell you all about these cool little projects in the near future. But for now, we live in the realm of secrets. Alright, that's it for me for now. Hope everyone enjoyed the tale, and I'm looking forward to sharing the rest of the series with y'all in the coming weeks. Stay safe, sane, and healthy out there.